There's one type of workout that professional marathoners include within their training programs that I think takes their race prep to an entirely new level. And unfortunately, most amateur athletes avoid this. And it's not because the workout is too hard or it's too advanced, it's because they simply have never been taught how to do them. Or maybe even they've never even heard of these types of sessions. So today, we're going to talk about lactate clearance. And to go just a step further, we're going to talk about alternation workouts and how these types of sessions can not only improve things like your lactate threshold, but they can also help translate to stronger, faster, more powerful race performances and personal bests over distances such as the marathon. My name is Coach Dylan Bellis. I've helped support over 1,000 athletes over the last decade from mile to marathon. I'm a 2:16 marathoner myself and a 2-time Olympic marathon trials qualifier here in the United States. And without a doubt, I'm a certified tryhard. My channel is here to help you learn more about training, help answer some of those questions that I was looking for when I was coming up through the sport so that I could be a faster, smarter, stronger racer, that I could just get ahead of the curve. And because I was not someone who was as talented as maybe the next person, I had to do the research. I had to learn more. I had to apply different strategies and go the extra mile so that I could be the better runner. And that is exactly what this channel is for you. So thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Let's start this off with talking about lactate. So when you run, your body is producing lactate. Actually, when you're just sitting, or when I'm sitting right here, right now, my body is producing a low level of lactate, no matter what I'm doing. And lactate is produced via glycolysis. It's a breakdown of glucose into energy. This is a constant thing that's happening at every single moment in the day. And for decades, lactate was the blame for fatigue. It used to be believed that it was lactate. I don't know about you, but if you grew up running and you ran races like the 400, the 800, or even the 1600 or the mile, you know, or had coaches who used to tell you that you're going to do lactic workouts, or you were going to go lactic at the end of the race, that feeling of burning in your muscles and tying up and just that hurt. And it's actually not true that lactate is the cause of that burning feeling in your muscles. And thanks to exercise physiologists such as George Brooks, he helped us gain a better understanding of lactate dynamics and what lactate actually is and how it contributes to your system. He showed us that lactate wasn't just a byproduct. It wasn't just waste. It's actually a fuel that your body can use to produce energy, like we talked about. And we know that fast twitch muscle fibers produce this lactate primarily. And that's actually an interesting statement, because when you think about running, you think about easy running, you don't think about your fast twitch muscle fibers being involved. But in fact, when you are running, or when you're really doing anything, you are getting some contribution from just about everything, from some slow twitch, from some intermediate, from some fast twitch muscle fibers. These things aren't entirely worked in isolation. They work together. And your body, your fast twitch muscle fibers, are what produce this lactate. And it's actually those slow twitch muscle fibers that eat them up for energy. It's actually quite interesting to think about. But before I get too derailed here, is that this lactate is shuttled to your slow twitch muscle fibers. It's also shuttled to your heart, the mitochondria in your system, where it is then oxidized for energy. It's really important that we use this as fuel. And as athletes, as marathoners, we need to become very efficient and proficient at producing lactate, clearing it, absorbing it, and using that for energy. This shuttling that we're talked about, the term that was coined was the lactate shuttle. And this is important because performance is not about avoiding lactate. Like I just said, it's about how efficiently we are using it. And this is a very trainable part of our physiology. Now let's connect this to the marathon. Remember when I told you that even as we are sitting here right now, we are producing a low level of lactate. And the same is true at marathon pace. Marathon pace still relies partly on glycolysis. It's not just about fat oxidation. And when glycolysis runs, that lactate is produced. Fast twitch muscle fibers are involved, but they aren't as dominant early into a run or early into a marathon. But remember, they are constantly contributing. And as fatigue builds, that contribution increases. As your slow twitch muscle fibers fatigue and then you have your glycogen availability tends to shift as the race progresses. Your body then has to recruit a higher degree of motor units to then maintain that force output as things are starting to decline. And the fibers that are involved there, they tend to be more glycolytic, which means that they produce lactate at a higher rate. So even if the pace doesn't change, lactate production is going to gradually increase later in the race. This is where clearance comes in because now your body needs to work harder to maintain that equilibrium. This is where durability becomes more metabolic. Muscular too, but the metabolic efficiency that you've done via your training, this matters even more. And remember, the marathon, it's not just about how strong your legs are. It's not about how many miles you've run or what's your durability for being able to run the distance. It's also about how stable your body can be when that fatigue starts to accumulate later in the race. Now the question becomes, how do we train that system? First, we need to talk about lactate threshold. Lactate threshold, or in our case, your anaerobic threshold, your lactate threshold 2, whatever you want to call it, it's roughly the pace that you can maintain for about 60 minutes. That's not a perfect science, but in practice, at least in coaching practice, when you don't have that data to use, this is where we as coaches like to operate to know that we are dialing in around our lactate threshold, and this is what we are trying to improve upon. Some people have the ability to go to labs, they get heart rate data, they get blood lactate data in the workout itself, and there they can determine roughly where their second lactate threshold lies. There were some studies that suggested your second lactate threshold exists around 4 millimoles. This is individual to each person. Everyone's going to have a slightly different lactate threshold, but just as a general reference, this is what we're looking at. Your lactate threshold is the highest intensity that you can maintain or that you can clear out the lactate that is being produced and use that for energy. That's all in balance still. It's the highest intensity where things are nice and even and your body is at a relatively stable level. And above this point, lactate starts to accelerate. And a lot of times it goes quickly. And after that happens, you are on a fast track to slowing down, blowing up. You are on a timetable before things start to crash. So think of threshold as your red line of steady effort. Raising your threshold matters. It is strongly related to aerobic performance in just about any event that is primarily aerobic. I would say 1500 to ultra marathon. Training your second lactate threshold is something that absolutely everyone needs to do. And if you're preparing for a marathon, you're listening to this, you should never avoid these types of sessions. But isolating, just doing threshold-based intervals or threshold-based tempos, that's not our main focus for today. We need to keep in mind that the marathon is not trained at your second lactate threshold. Now, those two things do work together, and you have to have both to maximize each other. But your marathon is run below your second lactate threshold. This usually sits around 75 to even upwards of 90+% in professional marathoners of their VO2 max. It's below their lactate threshold. It's below that tipping point. So in theory, this should mean you're stable. However, being below your threshold does not automatically mean that you are stable. Even below your threshold, lactate is constantly being produced. Your fast twitch muscle fibers, they're always contributing. The fatigue is shifting into other fibers as you're starting to recruit more because of the damage from the distance. Even things like terrain, wind, hills, surges in the race, these all contribute to these little minor spikes in energy, these minor spikes in production of lactate. And if you ever get to the point to where lactate exceeds the amount that you can clear it, even just a little bit, you get a drift. And that eventually causes that loss in equilibrium, which results in those performances where you run out of steam, you run out of gas, and it's inevitable that things are going to slow down and you're not going to hit your goal time. That equilibrium, that's the difference between marathon pace feeling like it's controlled and you're at ease versus the marathon pace feeling like it's fragile. I think we've all gone into workouts where we have these long marathon pace tempos and it doesn't feel controlled. It feels very hard, and you can feel your body gradually increasing effort as the duration unfolds. And then eventually you crack, you break, you might blow up at the end. We all know that that's not how the marathon should be. So when we talk about lactate and lactate clearance and the workouts that are going to help improve this, this is going to help that marathon pace not feel fragile. It's going to help give you some buffer. It's going to help maintain some of that equilibrium. So even if you experience some of those variations out on the course, out on those runs, your body is prepared to maintain that balance, to maintain that equilibrium so that you can sustain your pace and run your race. Now, I'd like to give you an example of how two runners can actually differ in terms of those lactate dynamics and how that can change from one person who is more proficient or efficient versus someone who is not. Now, this is just a hypothetical situation, but this is very much real in practice. I actually had an athlete, a friend of mine, when we were in college. We did an entire VO2 max test. We did lactate testing. We did all the above, and we had the same lactate threshold, and yet I was still able to be more successful over things like 10K or even running longer races, which we called our long runs back in the day, which really weren't races, but at the collegiate level, that tends to be what we did every single weekend. But in this hypothetical situation, let's just say you have a marathoner who is shooting to run 5:45 pace for the marathon. And both of these athletes, they had a threshold pace of around 5:30 pace per mile. On paper, things look quite identical. They have the same thresholds. They have the same similar profile. You would think, given that their lab testing is roughly the same, they could run the same for the marathon. But your lactate threshold is just a snapshot. It tells us the highest pace at which you can produce lactate and clear it out. But what it doesn't tell us, it doesn't tell how well that balance holds, how well that durability is after 90 minutes, after 2 hours, after 3 hours of running. And that's the key, because this is one reason why you see very successful people over 10K or half marathon. And yet you can find that that doesn't transfer very well to the marathon. They have these high thresholds, things are great, but their overall metabolic and potentially even muscular durability is just not there. And that's why you can take these two runners who, on paper, they might have the same threshold number. They might be able to run roughly the same pace for, let's say, a 10-mile race. However, when they go upwards in distance, the runner who has done more of the clearance work, who has done more on the durability side of the equation, that runner may have better dynamics to be able to maintain that equilibrium as fatigue is entered into this equation. Whereas runner B maybe hasn't been doing those types of sessions, maybe hasn't performed or trained in that same manner, and that individual might end up blowing up or might end up just running a slower race in general. So now the real question becomes, how do we train lactate clearance, and how do we use this to improve our overall durability? And ultimately, what matters the most is, how do we use this to create workouts to run faster marathons? Because that's what matters. This is where alternation workouts come in. I love alternation workouts. If I had to choose one type of session that has helped me become a more successful marathoner and has taken me from someone who ran 5:25 pace for a 5K when I was 18 years old to now at 32 being able to run under 5:15 pace per mile in the marathon, it is due to incorporating these alternation sessions. And remember, there are a lot of ways in which we can improve lactate clearance, but we are talking about just one workout, the alternation. The idea of an alternation session is that you want to alternate between a fast pace and a steady pace. You don't want to be lazy on either end. You don't want to turn it into an interval session where you run as hard as you can for a minute and then you stop and then you slow down. Now, there's a role for every single type of training we're doing, including things like threshold intervals or even longer runs with surges or even fast finish runs. These all are things, or just running volume itself. These are all parts of the training that help lactate clearance, but this is going to do the biggest damage. This is going to really dial that in. So you have these alternations. Ideally, You want that on section, you want that to be faster or right at your lactate threshold. It's right on the line between controlled and uncontrolled. And then you want to balance that with a pace, let's just say marathon pace plus 20 to 30 seconds per mile. What you're doing is you're teaching your body to push the level of stability or instability and then introduce some lactate into the system. And then also on the flip side of that, teach your body how to recover quickly, how to recover at faster speeds and raise your threshold and raise your ability to produce that lactate and clear it at even quicker paces. Early on, I like to introduce these sessions as 10 or 15 by minute on, minute off. And I like to scale that up over time to the point to where we're doing 60, 70, even 90 minutes of some variation of 1 to 5 minute reps. Now, me personally, I have loved the minute on, minute off structure. This past block, I did 40 times 1 minute on, 1 minute off, where I balanced between these two things. And the result was 5:12 per mile for the entire thing. And I ended up racing my marathon just a few seconds slower than that at 5:15 to 5:16 per mile. I found there was a direct correlation between how I was able to balance those workouts and my marathon time. And mind you, the longest run that I did at marathon pace in one go was only 30 minutes long. You can see that via my own training, by doing these alternation sessions, probably 30 times over the last 6 months. It's incredible how often I have done them. These have helped improve my durability, help improved my lactate threshold, and have improved my marathon time. Because I find that when I just go out and I run straight marathon pace and I train strictly at that, it actually limits my ability to maintain that. It makes it fragile. It makes it my endpoint. But if I can practice running a little faster and recovering a little faster, when I go and run at marathon pace in a race, I find it's much smoother, it's much easier, and I can maintain that equilibrium that we talked about even when there are surges, there are hills, little breakaways in the middle of the race. And even during the end of the race, when things really start to get hard, it's nice to have that base of those lactate clearance workouts to support the final few miles. I like to get my athletes to then progress that. So maybe we work to 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. So 3 minutes a little faster, 2 minutes a little slower. For more advanced athletes, we might even go up into half mile reps. So I've had athletes do up to 12 miles of half mile on, half mile off, really hitting that balance. And the rough estimate in the middle there should be around marathon pace. That's kind of what we're looking for, is slightly faster, slightly slower, and really balancing those two together. You'll see on the professional side, you'll see kilometers. You'll see a lot of 10 by 1K on, 1K off. Some people even scale this all the way up to 30 kilometers worth of doing it. That's definitely an intensive session. But for most people, I find in the thick of the marathon block, if you can get between 10 and 15 miles of this kind of work, whether that's through minutes, a variation of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes on, and roughly 1-to-1 or just slightly less than 1-to-1, that's the sweet spot. And then as a way of then transitioning that into marathon specific training, you can then lengthen it a little bit, slow down the pace. So it becomes something like 3 by 5K or 4 by 5K with a 1K float in between, where the 5K is just slightly faster than marathon pace and the float is again that same float that we were just shooting for. So remember, during the faster segment, you want it to be quicker, roughly 10K to lactate threshold pace. And what's happening here is that you're getting a greater contribution of fast twitch muscle fibers, which are going to happen no matter what at the end of the marathon when your body's breaking down and it needs to reach and grab for everything possible to contract and to provide energy towards the end of the run. You're going to be producing more lactate and using it in your body. And then during the float, do not just jog. That's the key here. And this is where a lot of amateur athletes mess up. because they do a lot of straight tempo runs, they do a lot of fast intervals, but those recoveries, they become lazy. You're missing a crucial part of your fitness, of your training. During these floats, what we like to call them, the overall oxygen demand, it remains really high. And your slow twitch muscle fibers, they obviously can actively oxidize and take in the lactate that was produced from the faster portion of the run. It's not a reset. It's this balance of just hard and steady and making sure that you mastered that, and you'll find that that'll improve your lactate threshold workouts or interval sessions. You'll find that it makes you stronger over things like long runs, and you'll find that even when you go and run your marathon at a steady clip, you're going to feel stronger. It's not going to feel fragile. You're going to be confident knowing that, hey, I just ran 12 miles or 15 miles with half of that being faster than marathon pace versus going out and running and progressing your volume from 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 miles just at marathon pace, where that feels like you are riding the line the entire time. Those traditional intervals, they spike the production of lactate, but then they also allow for a fuller recovery. So yes, you still get some clearance effect there, but it just doesn't do the same thing. And these alternations, they force that production and they force your body to accept that clearing at a continuous effort, just like you're going to experience. Last thing here. How are we going to program this within a buildup? So we have, let's just say we're going to put this into 3 different phases. We got our base, we have our pre-competition phase, we have our competition phase. Each of these can be a wide range. The base can be as long as you really need it to. Generally, the pre-competition phase is anywhere from like 6 to 8 weeks. And then your marathon specific phase, in my eyes, are between, let's say, 6 and 10 weeks. And then the base, of course, is going to be anywhere from ideally 4 to 6 weeks all the way out to 10 weeks, 12 weeks out. So we're looking at a bigger picture here. We're not confining ourselves to these 16-week, get fit quick programs. And that's why our specific phase is a little shorter, because we're actually continuously doing stacked work from block to block to block. And this allows you to do the prep work so that you can really go after it as hard as possible and you're ready for it. It's not like we're going into that competition phase and you haven't done any 20-mile, 32-kilometer long runs. You haven't done any sessions like that. No, that's not the case. Remember, we're constantly doing a mix of variation of training to help produce a result, to help be ready for that specific phase of training. So this is just my thought process, and I want to make sure that everyone understands what I'm talking about here. But during the base phase, how do we introduce these types of sessions? I think you need to start off slowly. And what I mean by that is this is a good time to start introducing those one-to-one workouts. I always like to start with 10 to 15 times, minute on, minute off. You can do 90 seconds on, 60 seconds off, however you want to do it. It's good to introduce it early because I found that in most amateur athletes, these sessions are actually really difficult because you're not used to using the recovery section as just a very slow jog or a walk. You're not used to that continuous flow of the workout. And we need to introduce this very early so that your body can get accustomed to it, that it can work itself up. And then during that same phase, towards the later end, you also just need to work on getting your threshold up, doing intervals, doing some shorter broken tempos. That's really important too, because I don't want to just start with these alternation sessions too early without already doing the work to build up your body's ability to run threshold pace. But now during that pre-comp phase, this is where we start to make it more of an emphasis. This is where those midweek workouts, we start to add more quality to it. So maybe we were only doing 20 or 30 minutes of these alternations before. I want to start pushing that a little bit more. Maybe we lengthen out the rep to 2 to 4 minutes instead of 1 minute. So you do 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, or 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, some variation of that. And then trying to then again accumulate 30 to 45 minutes, 60 minutes for those who are really well and advanced in that middle phase of training. And still, again, you do all the rest of the work that you need to do during the pre-comp phase. And then during your specific block, this is where we actually start to include them within the long runs. And we make them really long and really advanced, and we try to accumulate a ton of volume. So maybe it's within an 18 or 20-mile run. This will be the longest of what you do for these sessions. You'll throw them into the long run themselves. You might do the half mile on, half mile off. You might do 1K on, 1K off. One of my favorite workouts, I used to call it the mega fartlek. And what this was is 15 times minute on, minute off, 5-minute jog in between, 10 by minute on, minute off, 5-minute jog in between, 5 by minute on, minute off. And for me, it would give me roughly 12 or 13 total miles of running. And what I would do those alternations. I would alternate between roughly 5-minute pace and 5:30 pace. And if I felt really good on the day, that set break, that 5 minutes off, I would try to keep that nice and honest as well. This was one of my favorite sessions that I did. I've done it continuously now over the last 10 years or so. And I found that when I could hit 12 or 13 miles and I could average between 5:10 and 5:15, I was confident that that was going to translate well to the marathon, and then I could do that session. You can build this in a lot of different ways. I like to introduce it really early in the base phase, maybe 20 or 30 minutes total of work there. As you get to the middle phases of your training, we're working on extension of that, lengthening out the reps, progressing from one stage to the next. And then the final progression is when you start to throw them into your long runs, let's just say every 2 to 3 weeks in the specific phase. And then they become these lengthy workouts, these big sessions. My final session before I ran Houston in 2:17:44 just this past January of 2026. My last session was 40 times minute on, minute off, and I actually did that 2 weeks before my marathon, and it translated really nicely to my performance. To wrap things up, the marathon, it rewards the runner who does the work to become metabolically, to become muscularly steady and stable, to be able to maintain that balance from start to finish. And to be able to do that, you need to make sure that you pull out every card that you can, that you train your body's ability to produce that lactate and then recycle it at faster speeds, to introduce these harder alternation work within these big runs when you're already starting to break down and get fatigue and getting some of those fast twitch muscle fibers more and more involved. These are very trainable aspects of your fitness. And if you are someone who considers yourself a beginner or maybe even an intermediate runner or someone who's working their way up to what we would call an advanced athlete, these are sessions that you should absolutely not miss out on. If you are not doing these workouts, I personally feel like as a coach and an athlete who has done these over the last 10 years, that you're missing out. You're missing out on crucial aspects of your fitness that will support your marathon pace and that allow you to perform at higher levels. Give these sessions a try. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any questions regarding this, if there's something that I said that you would like me to explain further, you'd like me to help you with, please drop that down in the comments and let me know. I'll be happy to answer any running or coaching related questions that you may have regarding these sessions. And I hope you give them a shot. I hope you give them a try, because if you're not doing them, I think you're missing out.